Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. As you know, I recently read the new Heresy novel Dropsite Massacre, which I absolutely loved. And now it's time to start breaking it down and talking about the events therein, starting with the awesome confrontation between Horus Lupercal and Angron. However, before we really break it down and analyse it, I wanted to ask what this latest confrontation means for the character of Angron, his wider reputation and aura, as he was once universally looked at as one of the most feared Primarch fighters, and I'm not sure it feels that way anymore. So, we're going to go through Angron's record of matchups against his kin and ask if he's overrated or underappreciated, or does the truth lie somewhere in between? And well, Angron's history going against his brothers dates back to the Great Crusade, where Leman Russ brought his legion to warn Angron to stop implementing the Butcher's Nails into his legion, to cut out the massacres he is enacting in the Emperor's name. And of course it ended in a fight. Now, your perspective on this one will largely depend on your personal opinions of these particular two. The outcome was Angron standing over Russ, but with the Space Wolves having surrounded him with their bolters drawn and ready. As a Leman Russ fan, I obviously see this one as Russ wanting Angron to learn the lesson, and that Russ wasn't fighting to kill his brother at all. As the Horizon Lorgar states, it was a masterstroke and perfect victory. Whereas Angron himself is concerned, he won. He stood and Russ laid. And to be fair, at the end of the day, that is a fact. Angron was the Primarch standing, and so he deserves his props, regardless of any wider lesson that may have been trying to be taught. And this did kind of fit the earlier portrayals of Angron that we got in the early Heresy series. A beast of rage who, once started, simply couldn't be stopped. There's a line I think from the Raven's Flight audio drama, where the Raven Lord Corax, surviving in the Wild of Istvan after the Dropsite Massacre, knows he will die against Angron if the World Eater can simply catch him. Again, circumstances matter here, as Corax has been through literal hell and is in damaged war gear. But still, it speaks to the aura that Angron had. It was no question, Angron would kill him. And we then had Angron arrive to intervene in the later fight between Lorgar and Rabute Guilliman during their Shadow Crusade of Ultramar. And Rabute deserves his props for holding his ground, but it's a very one-sided encounter, with Angron quickly and strongly coming off the better, with Guilliman eventually crawling away in retreat, as Lorgar sacrifices Angron to Khorne, ascending him to demonhood. And so, we had Angron standing over two Primarchs triumphantly, with another certain that Angron would best him. So you can definitely see how and why Angron had that aura and reputation about him. It was a pretty strong showing in the early Heresy series for him, the Primarch, if anything at this point, deserving of his reputation. However, it was then that we moved into his demonic era, and that things began to change. The first real sighting and action of the Demon Primarch was when Perturabo was sent to bring him back to the war by the War Master Horus. And it was a fantastic showing and description of the rage-blinded legion the World Eaters had become, building the narrative and anticipation to their arrival beautifully. However, there isn't really any doubt here. When Angron finally showed up, it was an absolute beatdown by Perturabo on him. Using Angron's new warp-fueled essence against him, Perturabo used his formidable armour and resilience to deny Angron bloodshed, visibly weakening Angron as the contest went on, essentially enabling Perturabo to dominate him, beating him into submission and dragging him back to the wall. And so, as awesome as this was for the Lord of Iron, it was the first big blow against Angron's reputation, that aura of unstoppability that he possessed. As again, Perturabo had done it extremely convincingly here, and against Angron post-ascension to demonhood as well, when he is supposed to be technically stronger than ever. Now, Angron regained some steam moving into the Siege of Terror, unleashed by the War Master as the main battering ram of the traitor assault, mauling any loyal forces that got in his way, and it all built brilliantly to that legendary fight against Sanguinius before the Eternity Gate. Angron, fueled by all the bloodletting and carnage of the siege, was at the peak of his power, the paragon of everything Khorne's chosen champion should be. And he inflicted wounds in Sanguinius that the Angel would never recover from, wounds that even the Emperor feared were mortal. However, he lost. Again, Angron lost, the butcher's nails being ripped out of his skull by the Angel's bare hands. And it has to be said, this was a Sanguinius who was already exhausted, who had been fighting non-stop for days on end before, had literally just defeated the bloodthirster Kabanda as well, going on to fight Angron without even a break. And so when you factor all that in, as epic and amazing as their fight was, which again it really is and will stand the test of time as one of the greatest, it doesn't really reflect all that well on Angron again. 2 for 2 against his still mortal brothers. And then we get his post-heresy contest as well, 10,000 years later, against the returned Lion L. Johnson. Another titanic contest between two brothers, but another loss. This time with the Lion driving the Emperor's shield through Angron's face. And I hate to be that guy, but yet again this is against the mortal Primarch, not at his best. L. Johnson is 10,000 years older here, and he can feel the difference in himself. At first believing he was suffering some form of chaos curse or malady, instead having to come to terms with the fact that he's just gotten old. Now, we're probably talking minute differences here. He is still an Emperor-created Primarch after all, a demigod of war, but still, it's a factor worth mentioning. And so, there's a vast difference between the pre-Ascension Angron and post. The Primarch Angron was arguably lived up to that feared reputation, whereas the Demon Primarch, not so much. However, obviously there's a reason for this. The Demon Primarchs can't die. You can defeat them as much as you want and they only get banished, destined to return at a later date. They are essentially the 40k version of the cartoon villains I grew up watching as a kid in the 80s and 90s. The bad guys who turn up, but can't really win, because it would be too law-breaking. Look at Demon Magnus the Red for the perfect example, who's been defeated now more times than I can remember. However, the Magnus from the Horus Heresy, now that guy had the galaxy trembling, alone able to turn the tide of the war. And so, yeah, Demon Angron is vastly overrated, but that's really because he has to be. and I don't really think what transpires with the demon Angron should really have an impact on his character before. However, that then brings us to the latest Angron tussle we received in Drop Site Massacre, throwing us all the way back to the very start of the Heresy and Istvan. And again, we're going to debate this one in depth in the next conversation. However, it was there, Angron refusing to not fight his loyal brothers without honour was very likely going to ruin the traitor's upcoming ambush by warning them. And so he was put back into line before he could do so by Horus himself. And it was another absolutely amazing encounter, giving me goosebumps when it became clear just what was going to happen. But it was a contest that, in truth, the War Master dominated. At least in my opinion. It ends with Horus choosing to drop Worldbreaker and grab one of Angron's axes off him, in a demonstration that he could have beaten Angron already if he wanted to, with Angron yelling for him to end it, to deliver the final blow, and Horus saying no. And while in a sense I'm used to Angron losing now, technically this is the old Angron, the Primarch who beat Russ and Guilliman, and who had Korax certain of his own defeat. And so even with that Russ conflict, this is really Angron's first clear and categorical loss as the Primarch he was, depending on your point of view. And so the question now becomes, does this affect that reputation, that aura that he had? Honestly, for me, I think I have to say yes. I've always viewed the Primarchs as a bit like rock, paper, scissors. Some of them just match up better against certain brothers, and vice versa. And I do think any Primarch could be any Primarch. They're all gods of war after all. Even Lorgar could beat the Angel Sanguinius, with just the slightest mistake or fortune. And in a story context, this is Horus Lupercal he was going up against. There was no way the traitor Warmaster could lose this fight. But in terms of Primarch's aura and reputation, the ones we see as the top tier, I'm not sure you could put Angron in there anymore. At least I'm not sure I could. It's extremely hard to separate his demon record, even though I feel like we should. But I do think some of those losses naturally affect your opinion. However, more than that, I think it reflects the natural progression of the lore. The message that Russ was trying to impart all those years ago, in that earliest of encounters. A view not just of an unstoppable monster, but of an easily outsmarted one. As that has consistently time and again proven to be Angron's weakness. He doesn't get outpowered, he gets outfought. THOUGHT. It's what Russ did. It's what Horus does on Istvan. It's what Perturabo did when he became the demon. And heck, even Sanguinius and Lionel Johnson too. And far from it being a bad thing, I actually think it fits the character of Angron perfectly. The monster and the tragedy all rolled together. Arguably the strongest Primarch of the lot, but so too arguably the weakest. Completely unable to stop himself being his own greatest weakness. And so is Angron overrated or underappreciated? In a strange way, he's kind of both. However, I think the truth lays closer to the nature of his story and his character. The tragedy that was the Butcher's Nails, the life of choice that Angron simply never received. And so as always everyone, what do you think? What do you think of Angron's latest loss to Horus Lupercal? Do you think it impacts negatively on that reputation Angron had? Or does it simply fit the nature of his character perfectly? Do you think Horus needed that victory over Angron to cement something for himself? And in it being Angron, does that showcase Angron's own standing? Or is it just another loss for Angron, and proof he was always overrated compared to his brothers? That the nails stopped him from ever achieving his full potential? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.